Welcome everyone to section 4.3, Design and Production Approvals. We're going to be discussing a few different pieces of paperwork that are important to know in making sure that you have airworthy and FAA approved parts. So the first thing we need to know about is something that is called a Type Certificate Data Sheet, or TCDS. Here's basically the deal. Whenever a manufacturer wants to produce a new aircraft type, they've got to obtain a TCDS. What happens is that they'll submit their designs, their test results, their computations. The FAA will look it over, and by giving them a TCDS, they're essentially giving them the stamp of approval to go ahead. They say that the design is airworthy. It is important to note that the TCDS is considered to be FAA approved data. You may remember in our last lesson we talked about the difference between approved and, what was the other word that began with A? I'm at a loss for words here. Approved and acceptable. Yes, acceptable. This is approved data, so data of the highest form. Let's go ahead and jump ahead on what items there are in the TCDS. So in the TCDS, you can find a whole bunch of things, including configuration designations, which, by the way, if you see a symbol that looks like this, like 2PCSM under configuration designations, what that means is that your airplane is 2 passengers, it's a closed cockpit, it's a seaplane, and a monoplane. So do keep that in mind. You may get quizzed on something like that. It includes type and model number, minimum fuel grade, maximum approved RPM and horsepower, what kind of propellers are approved, airspeed limits, location of datum, center of gravity range. If you don't know what center of gravity is, that's okay. In a later unit, you're going to learn about weight and balance, and you'll know everything you need to know at that point. For now, all you need to know at this point is just that it is there, not necessarily what it is. Just know that it has to do with the balance of the airplane. Leveling the aircraft, maximum weights, equipment list, sometimes, especially on the older aircraft, and placard information. So now let's go ahead to drs.faa.gov, and I want to show you an example of what one of these TCDS documents look like. We're going to be looking for the TCDS of a Piper PA-23. For those of you guys who want to get a visual on what that looks like, this is an example of a Piper PA-23. It's an old school 1950s aircraft, but they still have a number of them that are still in use, so this could be one that you end up working on, especially if you're in general aviation. We're going to look for some of the things that we listed in the previous slide. So again, use your QR code. Let's go to drs.faa.gov. So when you go to the dynamic regulatory system, you're going to see, if you scroll down far enough, design and production approvals. You're going to click on that. And in this case, we're looking at TCDS, Type Certificate Data Sheets. Okay. And once you do that, we're going to go ahead and look by the TCDS number, and I believe I told you to look for IA10, 1A10. So once we do that, I'm going to click Apply. What ends up happening is that the TCDS for the 1A10 appears, which is the Piper aircraft, and there's a couple things that you're going to notice. Right off the bat, there are multiple aircraft that are authorized under this TCDS. It's not just the PA-23. You have PA-23-250, PA-23-235. There's multiple similar aircraft that can be under a similar TCDS. Now, let's take a look at some of the things that we mentioned in the previous slide. So, let's see if maybe we could find some fuel grade, horsepower rating, center of gravity. What information can we find on a TCDS? So again, the model that we're worried about right here is going to be the PA-23, which conveniently happens to be near the top. So the PA-23 let's see, they will allow 2 Lycoming 0320 series engines. They have a fuel grade of 8087. Engine limits are 2700 RPM. They have airspeed limits in miles per hour and knots. They have the center of gravity range, which says that your center of gravity is between station 94 and station 100. Again, you don't need to know what that means yet. Empty weight center of gravity, very often they'll say none on these. Maximum weight is 3,500 pounds. That's important to know when you're considering passengers and luggage. Number of seats. They have 2 different scenarios. The airplane as it comes with 4, but there's also an option to have a 5th seat. There's a maximum baggage. You can put 200 pounds at station 150. Let's see. There's fuel capacity. It'll hold up to 72 gallons of fuel. There's a bunch of required equipment. Even control surface movements. It'll tell you that you have ailerons, elevators, and rudders that can go up to 30 degrees in the up direction and 15 degrees in the down direction. And it even talks about flaps. So again, this is a lot of really important information. A TCDS can tell you a lot of different things. And as you continue on, you're going to see that this is the TCDS information for the PA 23-160. So it's a slightly different rendition of the Piper airplane that I showed you before. So again, that's the PA-23. Going back to this, we've now had a chance to take a look and answer some of these questions. It doesn't answer all of these questions, but very often you'll find this kind of information on many of the TCDS. So, a couple things to mention here. The TCDSs are only given for airframes, engines, and propellers. You don't have to worry about appliances or instruments when it comes to a TCDS. Important thing to know. Another thing that's important to know, and I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again, multiple models of similar aircraft are often placed under the same TCDS. I already showed you this, and I even included a screenshot of it right here. There are some older airplanes that, prior to the days of TCDS, had different documentation. Like, for example, before 1965, before they had TCDS, they had something that was called the aircraft specs. And essentially it's the same thing as TCDS. It includes a lot of the information, fuel type, engines that are approved, center of gravity, weight, different things like that. It includes all that same information, but they're usually a lot longer because there's also a required equipment list included in these as well. And then antique listings. You may get a question on this. If there are 50 or fewer of a particular type of aircraft, the TCDS is instead placed under a listing called antique listings. And one example of an antique listing is this particular aircraft right here from the 1930s. Now, a TCDS is approved documentation from the FAA that a certain configuration of aircraft and design is approved. Does that mean you can't make changes? No, of course not. You can make changes, but only under the following 3 circumstances. If you have an airworthiness directive that is telling you that you have to make changes to the aircraft, then that's considered approved and that supersedes the TCDS. If you're also applying for a supplemental type certificate, basically if you yourself want to make a modification to an aircraft, you have to apply to get a type certificate if you want to make a deviation to the change. If you're also making a major repair or alteration, you could make those changes to the aircraft by filling out an FAA Form 337. We'll go into STCs and Form 337s later in this unit. That basically covers it. That's TCDS for you in a nutshell. I hope this is helpful to you. Clancy over and out.